All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending the webinar today. My name is Holly Marita and I'm with David Insurance in Wisconsin. Just a few housekeeping notes. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them at the end. We're excited to bring you a four-tiered webinar series, Understanding the Core Components of Your Self-Funded Plan. Today's webinar is part 2 of 4 and focuses on managing self-funded risk, the role of the stop-loss carrier. Our guest speaker, Steve Butts, is Principal and Executive VP of Certus Management Group. He has over 30 years of experience and is excited to share the role of the stop-loss carrier in evaluating risk, the strategies of self-funded plans used to manage that risk. Thank you, Steve, for joining us today.
Thank you, Holly. I appreciate that very much, and I appreciate this opportunity to be together. I want to tell you that this is I'm actually in my office for the first time in probably over a month, and it's a lonely place, but it is good to be out of the house. I've enjoyed the positive of our present circumstances allowing me to work at home, and that's gone well. But it does feel good to get out of the house from time to time. So this is a good excuse for that, and I will look forward to the next half hour. So again, I am here to talk about the role of the stop-loss carrier in a self-funded plan, and just to kind of set this up. There's a lot to know about stop-loss if you're considering being a self-funded employer and providing benefits to your employees through a self-funded arrangement. There's contract types, there's different types of coverages, layers of protection, and that's really something that your benefit advisor can help you through. What I would like to kind of focus on today is more defining the role of the stop-loss carrier, because I think it is often misunderstood. And so I think if you're considering being self-funded, if you're already self-funded but don't feel like you have a complete handle on how it all fits together, or if you're considering moving to a self-funded platform, I think just knowing a little bit more about the stop-loss carrier and our role should be helpful to you. So I am, as I said, in my office, which happens to be in Indianapolis, Indiana. So this is a presentation that I have used a few different times, different adaptations of it. And being from Indiana, if those of you not in Indiana aren't aware, we're a basketball state, and I think I've used the theme of basketball and sports in general. Just I believe that there's a lot in terms of how you approach your benefit plan. I think there are a lot of similarities between sports and how to successfully compete, and then also how to successfully run your benefit plan. So I'm going to kind of use that theme throughout. I think the idea of coaching is something that I think enters into the success of a self-funded plan, and having the right coaching and the right advice is critical to that. So you'll see that theme throughout this presentation. To give you a little bit of perspective about Certus Management Group and my history and how we come to this point. Certus Management Group is what's known as a managing general underwriter. Much of the stop-loss insurance in place today is written through organizations called managing general underwriters, which means we underwrite and administer the stop-loss coverage on behalf of an insurance company. And Certus Management Group has been in existence for 22 years. And in that 22 years, we have represented a company by the name of Sirius Insurance Group, SIRIUS, for the entirety and consistently from our founding. And I think that's important, because the longevity of a relationship between an underwriting organization and an insurance company brings a lot of stability to the self-funded employer. And that's an important relationship. So I'll talk a little bit more about our experience and our perspective and the knowledge that we've gained in our 22 years existence. I personally have been involved in underwriting stop-loss insurance for 30 years. So it's been near the entirety of my career. So again, that brings some perspective that I hope to bring out in this presentation. So I am not an Indiana University graduate, and I don't know what everybody thinks of Bob Knight. He's a lightning rod. There aren't many that are agnostic towards Bob Knight and his reputation. There's a lot of folks in Indiana that love him, but understand there's some folks that differ in his approach. But I will say this statement: there's a lot of again, a lot in coaching and a lot in Bob Knight in particular that can be applicable to your approach in providing benefits. And this statement is universal to sports as well as success in business. And it's universally true. The key is not the will to win, but it is the will to prepare to win that is important. And that's what we're going to talk about today: preparing to be successful, defining success, and then preparing to be successful in your self-funded plan. So I'll begin by just saying, in terms of how you view the stop loss carrier, I think it's important that you understand that the stop loss carrier is really your partner as a self-funded employer in risk assumption. Because if you're self-funded, you really are the insurance company, and the stop loss carrier is ultimately a layer of think of it as reinsurance protection for you as the insurance company in providing your benefit plan. And if you consider that relationship, it's near the interest of the stop loss carrier and the plan sponsor are near perfectly assigned. And I say near perfectly aligned because about the only way we're not aligned perfectly is in how much premium we charge for the stop loss coverage. Obviously, the self-funded employer wants to pay the least amount of premium possible, and the stop loss carrier wants to capture as much premium as possible. But in every other way, our interests are perfectly aligned. If your strategy is sound for controlling costs within your benefit plan, it's going to benefit the plan, and it's also going to benefit the stop loss carrier. So anything that's good for you is good for the stop loss carrier and vice versa. So if we begin with that perspective, I think it will inform the rest of our conversation and how we are partners. So what is the role of the stop loss carrier? To begin with, our underwriting is designed to assess the medical claim risk of the plan. We have access to a significant amount of industry data. We have actuarial analysis with that industry data. We also have, again, 22 years of experience and information on all the plans that we have insured as the stop loss carrier in that 22 years. So we have proprietary data on our own block of business. We purchase data that's made available through various data warehouses, consulting firms, actuarial firms. And then we also have the view of all the companies that we have the opportunity to propose stop loss coverage to. So in any given year, we're going to see probably 3,000 different groups come through our underwriting department seeking a quote from us for stop loss coverage. And within every one of those requests, there is going to be a degree of history of that group. And we can look into that history and capture and retain that data in terms of what their strategies were, how their plan was structured, what worked, what didn't work, what the medical claim trends are in that data. So we have a massive amount of data to work with, and then our underwriters are all trained. We're not clinicians, but we do, just by virtue of what we see day in and day out, over and over again, we do develop some degree of expertise in assessing what the risk might be to any given diagnosis. And we can see then from that risk what the plan might expect to spend on those claims in any given year. So the data that we have available to us brings a level of credibility and expertise to you, the plan sponsor, in our underwriting. We then assess, and part of the underwriting process, we then assess the different components that are being brought to bear in that plan to manage that claim expense and that medical risk. And those components are going to include the third-party administrator, your platform. What I mean by that is, are you straight up indemnity? Do you have a PPO network? Do you have a limited network or an exclusive provider network? There is a platform known as RBP, which stands for reference-based pricing. If you're not familiar with reference-based pricing, that's in lieu of a network and a contracted arrangement with providers. Reference-based pricing just means that the claims, once submitted by the provider, will be reimbursed at a reference of Medicare. Typically, it's going to be somewhere between 140% to 200% of what Medicare would allow as eligible for that reimbursement to the provider. So, and then there are various hybrid type of arrangements for payment platform. So your PBM is another component, and there are differences of pharmacy benefit managers around the country, and they're more than nuanced differences. There's dozens of different companies that provide pharmacy benefit management and have different structures and different models to the way in which they manage the pharmacy spend within your plan. And then pre-cert and medical management is another critical component, and there's a lot that goes into that. That's one of the most critical, if not the most critical component of the plan in terms of managing cost. And I'll get into that a bit as well. And there's other different types of cost containment claim management initiatives that we see day in and day out. And all of those things, when applied to the medical experience and the projected risk in terms of the medical claims, are effective in different ways in managing costs. So we have ways in our underwriting process to credit the different types of initiatives that are in place to manage cost. And so, how do I get back? And so those two combined allow us to produce a quote for stop loss insurance. And that quote, those terms of the stop loss insurance really are what define the financial boundaries of any self-funded plan. It is the stop loss terms that dictate the maximum exposure to the plan, the maximum liability, the maximum spend in any given year for a self-funded plan. So what's important to note, because the stop loss carrier and the plan sponsor's interests are perfectly aligned, we're really the ones with the expertise to tell you what is your risk in being self-funded, and the terms of the stop loss coverage are a reflection of that risk. So it's important that be accurate. We compete, stop loss carriers compete for business. And so when we're offering a stop loss proposal to any group considering self-funding, we know that there's going to be other stop loss carriers probably also providing proposals for stop loss coverage to that plan. And it's important that whatever decision you make with regard to your stop loss carrier, that you're confident in the accuracy of their underwriting, because it doesn't serve your interest or the stop loss carrier's interest if the projections or claim cost in any given year are not accurate. If they're too low, that's not good. If they're too high, that's not good. And again, there's more to that conversation, and your advisor can certainly help you with those discussions and those considerations. So there's a lot of so conventional wisdom would be that once we've underwritten the coverage and the employer has purchased the stop loss coverage, that our job ends there until there's a claim. And that's really not a complete thought. Our role in terms, the stop loss carrier's role in terms of ongoing partnership with the plan is really throughout the year. And we are in a unique position because, again, our interests are aligned with the plan for oversight of all those components and to ensure the accountability, every service provider, every vendor that is being utilized in that plan. So what are some examples of that? Because a self-funded plan is technically the insurance company and is governed by ERISA, there will always be a requirement for a plan document. And that plan document is really the document that dictates what claims are eligible, how the plan will be run. It is no different than if you're buying your coverage from Blue Cross, the policy, and it's fully insured, the policy that Blue Cross provides. The plan document is really the legal basis by which the plan will be administered and benefits will be administered. So It is critical, and what's written in that plan document is what supports all the plan components and how they do their job and how they execute. So we rarely see that plan document before we quote the stop loss. And in most cases, if you're in year one of a self-funded plan, that plan document is something that is drafted with your involvement as the plan sponsor after you've made the decision to be self-funded. So it's not uncommon for that plan document to draft to weeks. The third-party administrator is typically the one that's executing the plan document drafting, and they will send that document to us as the stop loss carrier, and we will review that document and approve it as being in line with the assumptions made in the stop loss underwriting process. And we will approve it as being compliant with legal requirements, and also that the necessary provisions are included in that document to support all those service providers and all those vendors that are going to be executing your cost containment strategy. And then we oversee how those vendors execute, and we do that via the claim. So when we get a request in for reimbursement of a stop loss claim, we see how every dollar is spent on that claim. If it's a $500,000 cancer claim, cancer diagnosis, we see how every dollar is spent in managing that claim and what's been done well or what's not been done well. So we are holding the vendors and those involved in managing that claim accountable for what they're being paid to do. And then we receive from the third-party administrator plan reporting, claim experience, and large case management reporting. So when there are diagnoses that become catastrophic in terms of cost, we're seeing the reporting on that as it's happening and making sure everything is functioning the way it's supposed to function, and that the plan is not paying for things it's not supposed to be paying for. So those are all things that the stop loss carrier does as well. And then, of course, we handle your renewal, and we also reimburse your claims, so your stop loss claims. So there's a lot more that goes into it than just underwriting the coverage itself. And the alignment between the stop loss carrier and the plan sponsor is best illustrated by the fact that everybody that's getting paid, from providers to right down to every one of these vendors, is being paid with either plan money or stop loss carrier money. So we're the only two entities in the whole equation that are paying for all of these services, and so we have a mutual vested interest in making sure they're well executed. So hopefully that gives you some idea of our perspective and what we see on a daily basis and how we interact with the plan. And what that naturally leads to then is we can identify common, what we call critical pain points. Where is the plan vulnerable, and by proxy, the stop loss carrier vulnerable to waste, fraud, and abuse within the provider billing? So we see consistently a number of different things that we believe can and should be managed to ensure the success of the self-funded plan. And you have before you on the screen a list of those things. I'm not going to go through all, but it kind of gives you an idea of what's going on in the world of healthcare and the financing of healthcare. PPO network arrangements are not always contracted with the plan sponsor's best, or the stop loss carrier's best interest in mind, and we still see egregious billing practices that are permitted under network contracts by some providers, and I'll show you an example of that here in a moment. Pharmacy is something. PBM, retail pharmacy, and specialty pharmacy, specialty drugs are obviously in the news quite a bit. So we're seeing a lot of that, and the cost of those drugs is off the chart and trending upward at an exponential rate. So it's important that we manage those two components. Let me give you an example of a pain point and how we can work together, stop loss carrier plan sponsor, to make sure that pain point is is protected. This would be an example within the plan document. So this is an actual plan document that we've redacted. And there is a definition within every plan document for usual and customary or reasonable and customary, and that limits the plan's exposure on any given claim to what would be considered usual and customary charges for that particular service from the provider. This particular document, an actual document, in their entire definition of usual and customary, suggests at the very end, the last sentence, network providers' charges will be the usual and reasonable charge will be the contracted rate, meaning that the claim comes into the third-party administrator and it gets paid at whatever the network says is reimbursed. There's not a whole lot, or reimbursable allowable. There's not a whole lot of actual adjudication that happens with a claim when this is the wording in the plan document. Why does that matter? You may have heard this statistic before, that upon further review, up to 80% of medical bills contain errors. So if there's not an adjudication of that claim, 8 out of 10 times there's going to be mistakes in that claim, or things in that bill that shouldn't be in that bill, or charges that are mistakes, or it could be just a clerical error, something's entered incorrectly. There needs to be an adjudication of every claim. And so if your plan document doesn't allow you to adjudicate an in-network claim, you're going to be subject and vulnerable to these mistakes. Let me give you an example of how that plays out. There's a lot on this slide, so I'll try and go through it quickly and just give you a sense of that. And this is, again, how your stop-loss carrier's looking out for you. This was a gallbladder surgery in California, and this is a copy, hopefully you can see my cursor here, a copy of the actual hospital bill, the UB04 hospital bill. The total facility bill charges for this outpatient gallbladder surgery was $219,000. It was an in-network provider. The PPO discount was 22%. So the plan cost was $170,000. That's just the hospital. To give you some perspective, the surgeon who performed that surgery's bill was only $1,800, and there was a 67% discount. So the surgeon himself, the doctor's not the problem here. The surgeon, on a separate bill, was paid $605 for this surgery that the hospital was charging $219,000 for. So within this bill, within this bill, there's some obvious mistakes. There is an operating room charge for $102,000. That's 90 minutes of an operating room. If they're getting $102,000 for every 90 minutes, that facility is doing pretty darn well. And to give you some perspective, the Medicare allowable if Medicare was paying for this claim, they would have allowed $5,400 for that line item of that bill. There were 2 revenue codes on this bill for recovery room. I don't know if the person actually recovered in 2 separate rooms, but you can see the charges for the recovery room twice, one $19,000 and one $28,000. And then there's no itemization to this bill. So there's one revenue code for all the sterile supplies, things like IVs and dressings and who knows what else that would fall into sterile supplies. But the revenue, the one line item lumped together for sterile supplies was $46,000. Now, if there's no adjudication of this claim, there's no way to challenge that. And clearly the plan is going to pay significantly more than they should if they don't have the proper vetting and adjudication of that claim, and then somebody standing in the gap for them to challenge this provider and challenge the PPO network for this claim. That's where the stop-loss carrier comes in and works with the different vendors in your plan to make sure that that the provider and the vendor are held accountable. I'm running out of time, but this is another example of a rheumatoid arthritis claim, going back to the cost of prescription drugs and how high that's getting. This is an infusion that's done in a clinic for rheumatoid arthritis. This was going to be a series of infusions, the bill charges of which were $21,000 a piece. Gives you an idea of what Medicare would allow for those infusions. But this was another situation where because this client had the right cost containment strategy built in, and we as the stop-loss carrier caught this and saw how high the charge was for this bill. we were able to introduce the patient to an alternative site of care and provide a financial incentive for that patient to utilize the alternative site, the alternative infusion site. And you can see the difference in cost between just getting this infusion. Again, this is something they go in for. It takes an hour to have this drug infused. Instead of a bill charge of $21,000, the alternative site of care was $8,750. So a significant savings to the plan. But if there's not anything in that strategy in that self-funded plan to catch these, and if the stop-loss carrier isn't catching these, then both the stop-loss carrier and the plan are going to pay for something that shouldn't need to be paid for. So again, I've given you the perspective and gone through this pretty quickly, but just our perspective is we're a partner. We're perfect. The stop-loss carrier is perfectly aligned, and by terms specifically of Service Management Group, our 22 years in the business, which are our long tenure and our stature in the market and the amount of business we've written and seen over those 22 years just informs a lot of our approach to providing stop loss and our partnership with the self-funded plan. Again, these are all the moving parts of a self-funded plan. It's difficult for any employer to understand and be able to manage day to day all these moving parts. Your stop-loss carrier is your partner in that. And I'll just close by saying, again, taking a coaching analogy, the margin for error is pretty slim between success and something less than success in a self-funded plan. It can be as little as 2 or 3 claims. That can turn your year from a good year claim-wise, cost-wise, to a bad year if those claims aren't properly managed. And it's the stop-loss carrier's role to assist you as a partner in risk assumption in managing those claims and preventing the truly catastrophic events from occurring. So I went through that very quickly, Holly, but if you'd like to help close us out, or if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I know we're about at the end of our time. We do have a question here. What is the most important strategy for the plan to use to protect against waste from providers who treat the conditions that lead to the pain points that you alluded to?
Well, again, I think the strategy needs to be to have as much when you're considering being self-funded, getting as much information as you possibly can. One of the challenges is the lack of transparency in any fully insured arrangement, or frankly, even a self-funded arrangement with a carrier chassis or carrier administration, because the information that those insurance companies, fully insured carriers, or self-funded ASO carriers are providing is really not adequate for you as the employer to make an educated, informed decision about what your risk is. So we encourage the employer to push hard to get information. In the absence of information, we typically will, depending on the size of your group, we will typically ask for individual medical questionnaires, and that can be somewhat uncomfortable, I find, for some employers, but it really is an opportunity for the employer to assess the risk of their employee population by virtue of the underwriting process. Our folks are trained to look at those medical questionnaires, and then without giving up any private health information or identifying any individuals within our reporting back on those medical questionnaires, we can certainly give the employer an idea of what claim potential exists, what catastrophic claim potential exists within their employee population that they need to be concerned about. So that's just going in, having as much information as possible, and being willing to turn over every rock possible in making the decision to be self-funded. And then just having a strategy of being able to introduce medical management prospectively, so that when requiring pre-authorization, pre-certification for as many procedures as possible, certainly all inpatient, outpatient infusion therapies should be pre-authorized, pre-certified, so that a qualified medical management company can speak directly to the provider and to the patient to determine whether it's medically appropriate as well as financially appropriate, and then being able to, if it's not one or both of those things, being able to negotiate or manage or inform that employee about their alternatives to the cost or the care that shouldn't be happening.
Perfect. Well, thank you. We appreciate that. I know we're just a few minutes over on time, but Steve, we appreciate you joining us today, sharing all of the valuable tips. We'll send out Steve's contact information too, or get some answers for the rest of you that had questions. Just in closing, the next webinar will be next week, the 17th from 8 to 8:30 with Kyle Fields from AproRx. Talking about reducing your pharmacy spend and the hidden revenue streams. So if everyone has a great day, thanks for joining us again, and talk to you soon.